Colonel David Hargrove read the request twice. Then he set it down on the field table and looked at his S3 the way a man looks at someone who has just told him something he finds professionally insulting. They want to expand their area of operations into Grid Square Bravo 7. Yes, sir. That's our western flank. Yes, sir. Tell them no. Captain Ellis was 26 years old and had learned in 4 months that there were certain tones in Hargrove's voice that ended conversations. This was one of them. He wrote the denial on a message pad, tore off the sheet, and left without asking the question forming in his mind. The question was, why? The answer would have required explaining a worldview built over 19 years of military service, 2 combat deployments, a master's degree in strategic studies from Georgetown, and 4 years teaching infantry tactics at Fort Benning. It would have required explaining what Hargrove believed, genuinely, professionally, without malice, about counterinsurgency warfare and the units best equipped to conduct it. The short version: the Australians were not that unit. David Hargrove had arrived in Vietnam in March 1967 as commanding officer of the 2nd Battalion, 503rd Infantry Regiment, 173rd Airborne Brigade. He was 41. Korea as a lieutenant, then a decade in the machinery of American professional development, schools, staff tours, command rotations, the careful accumulation of credentials that produced a colonel. He was not an unintelligent man. His Georgetown thesis had drawn on Galula, Trinquier, and Kitson. He had read the French experience in Algeria. He understood, in theory, that insurgency required a different approach than conventional warfare. What 19 years had not prepared him for was the gap between theory and the specific, humid, ambush-ridden reality of Phuoc Tuy Province in 1967. His battalion was good. The 2503 had M16A1 rifles, M60 machine guns, M79 grenade launchers, artillery support from Fire Support Base Anderson 12 kilometers east, and helicopters on call from the 11th Aviation Battalion. More combat power per square kilometer than any force that had ever operated in Phuoc Tuy Province. They were also getting hit. Not catastrophically, not in ways that would appear damning in the monthly reports moving up through 3 Corps to MACV, but the pattern was there for anyone who chose to read it honestly. In April 1967, the 2-503 conducted 47 patrols. 11 made contact. Of those 11, 9 had been enemy-initiated. The battalion killed 31 Viet Cong and lost 8 men killed in action, 22 wounded. A ratio of roughly 4-to-1. In the mathematics of Vietnam, this was considered acceptable. Hargrove considered it unacceptable, not because of the ratio. 4-to-1 was defensible in any briefing, but because of those 9 enemy-initiated contacts. 9 times the enemy had chosen when and where to fight. 9 times the tactical initiative had belonged to the D445 Provincial Mobile Battalion, which operated in Phuoc Tuy with a confidence that Hargrove found personally offensive. He was working on solutions. More aggressive patrolling, night ambush positions, varied insertion methods, the standard toolkit of a battalion commander applying correct doctrinal responses. What he did not want in the middle of this process was a neighboring unit disrupting the operational pattern he was building. The neighboring unit was the 1st Australian Task Force, based at Nui Dat, 12 kilometers southeast. Hargrove had met the Australians twice. The first time was a 3rd Corps coordination meeting in Vung Tau in April.
He had sat across a briefing table from Brigadier Stuart Graham and a collection of staff officers in their distinctive slouch hats, left brim pinned up, looking to Hargrove's eye like men dressed for a colonial expedition rather than a modern counterinsurgency. When the G3 asked about patrol methodology, Graham described it in terms so general as to be operationally useless. Hargrove had noted this. Units vague about their methods were either concealing failure or protecting a capability they did not wish to share. He assigned the Australians to the first category. The second meeting was accidental, the Long Bin PX in May. He was buying a replacement battery when he overheard two Australian SAS corporals at the counter discussing a patrol completed the previous week. 8 days in the field. A Viet Cong supply cache located and photographed. 3 enemy killed without Australian casualties, after which the patrol had extracted rather than exploited. He paid for his battery and left. On the drive back, he reached the conclusion that this confirmed his assessment. 8 days for 3 kills and a cache. His battalion could find a cache, call in an airstrike, and be back at the firebase for dinner. The Australian approach, slow, methodical, intelligence-focused, was a small force making virtuous necessity out of limited capability. Not a model, an adaptation. This was what Hargrove believed when Ellis brought him the request for Bravo 7. This was what he believed when he denied it. This was what he would spend the next 40 days systematically, painfully, and publicly discovering was wrong. The denial went back to 1ATF through the 3rd Corps channel. The Australian response came 24 hours later. Brief. The 1ATF would maintain its current area of operations. The request had been made for operational reasons that remained valid. If Hargrove's battalion was conducting operations in Bravo 7, the Australians would coordinate to avoid overlap.
No complaint, no escalation, no request for a meeting. Hargrove took this as confirmation that the Australians had accepted his judgment. What he did not know was that the response had been drafted by a sergeant named Peter Carruthers, attached to the 1ATF intelligence section, who had looked at the denial and said to his officer, "He doesn't want us in Bravo 7. That's all right. D445 wants us there less." The officer asked what he meant. Carruthers pulled out his map and pointed to 3 grid references. Cache site, way station, rally point, all confirmed from the last 2 patrols. D445 moves through Bravo 7 to resupply units further north. With the Americans operating there, D445 will know they're coming 4 hours before they arrive. They'll move around them. And if we operate there? Carruthers folded his map. They won't know we're there until we want them to. This was not shared with Hargrove. The Australians did not give their maps to a man who had said he did not need them. The first ambush happened on June 3, 1967. Alpha Company was moving along a ridgeline in Bravo 7 at 0840, following a trail the point element had assessed as recently used. The lead squad walked into 4 M18A1 Claymore mines, captured American equipment, positioned along a 40-meter kill zone at grid reference BS 771432. Small arms fire from 2 flanking positions followed for 11 minutes before the enemy withdrew. 3 killed, 7 wounded. No enemy bodies found. Hargrove read the after-action report that evening. The enemy had established the ambush position in the previous 48 hours. The flanking positions were placed to prevent exactly the maneuver his doctrine called for. He wrote in his commander's notes, "Enemy demonstrates pre-positioning capability. Increase trail avoidance protocols." This was the correct doctrinal response. It was also, as events would demonstrate, insufficient. The second ambush happened on June 7th. Bravo Company had positioned an ambush element along a probable supply route. The timing assessment was correct. The timing was not. The enemy had reconnoitered the trail that afternoon and found it clear. Bravo Company had not moved into position until 2100. For 6 hours, the trail had been empty. At 0215, 31 men from D445's 3rd Company moved along it. Not a resupply party, a full tactical platoon, aware American units were in the area, using a route they had verified that afternoon. The enemy returned fire immediately, broke to the flanks in 2 groups, and maneuvered. 22 minutes. 7 enemy killed, 2 Americans killed, 9 wounded. Hargrove read this report on June 8th and called his S2, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb. "What's D445's current assessment?" Webb spread the map. 300 to 350 fighting strength. Main base area northeast of Nui Din. 2 primary resupply routes, 1 through Bravo 7, 1 further east. Have we disrupted the Bravo 7 route? A pause. Not measurably, sir. They're adapting their timing. How? We're not sure, sir. They appear to have advance warning of our patrol schedules. Hargrove looked at the map. Alpha Company's point element at 0840 on a recently used trail. The enemy platoon reconnoitering that afternoon and finding the route clear. "They're watching us," he said. "Yes, sir. They have an observation network, local population, sympathizers. When we move, they know." Can we fix that? Not with current methods, sir. We'd need either a civil affairs capability we don't have or an intelligence collection capability that can operate without being observed. Hargrove was quiet for a long time. "What's the Australian patrol record?" Webb pulled a separate folder. March through May. 41 patrol operations. Contact initiated by Australians in 29. Enemy initiated in 4. Kill ratio? 156 confirmed enemy against 7 Australian KIA. 22-1. The SAS component separately reports above 80-1. Hargrove did the arithmetic. His battalion, 11 contacts, 9 enemy initiated. The Australians, 41 contacts, 29 Australian initiated. Their area is smaller, approximately 60% of ours, sir. So they're achieving a higher kill ratio in a smaller area with a smaller force. That is the mathematical conclusion, sir. Hargrove looked at Bravo 7 on the map, the area he had denied. He did not say anything about that. What he said was, "Set up a liaison visit with 1 ATF. I want to understand what they're doing." The Australian response came back in 18 hours. It was not what Hargrove expected. The 1 ATF liaison officer phoned and outlined conditions. Any American officer visiting for an operational assessment would deploy with Australian patrols in the field. No observation from the firebase, no briefing room summary. Minimum 5 days. Full compliance with Australian patrol protocols. No special accommodation. Hargrove recognized the test. The Australians were not saying no. They were saying, "If you want to understand us, come and be uncomfortable." Accepted. I'll go myself. Schedule it for the 13th. Ellis did not express the surprise he felt. He drafted the acceptance and sent it. Hargrove arrived at Nui Dat on June 13, 1967, aboard a RAAF Caribou from Vung Tau. He brought his aide, his M16A1, and the professional certainty of a man who expected to spend 5 days observing a capable but limited Allied unit and return with a clear picture of what they were doing and why it could not scale to a full American battalion. The certainty did not survive the first hour. An Australian quartermaster sergeant named Collins met him at the stores building. Collins was perhaps 35, with a face that had spent enough time in Southeast Asian weather to look like worked leather. He looked at Hargrove the way a craftsman looks at a customer who has arrived with the wrong materials. "Sir, I'll need to look at your kit." Collins went through the pack without hurrying. He removed each item, examined it, and placed it in one of two piles. The pile of replacements grew faster. Your boots. American jungle boots. The sole pattern is incorrect for this terrain. You'll draw Australian issue. Hargrove had worn these boots for 4 months. He said nothing. Your canteen. The metal carrier makes noise. You'll use collapsible canvas. Your radio. The AN/PRC-25 has an external antenna that catches on vegetation. You'll use a patrol-configured set. Your rifle. The M16 has a distinct sound signature. Every VC in Phuoc Tuy knows that sound. You'll carry an L1A1 SLR. This stopped him. Sergeant, I've carried the M16 for 4 months. I know its operation completely. Collins looked at him without expression. Yes, sir. And if the L1A1 is unfamiliar, I'd recommend the range this afternoon. The bolt mechanism is different and the trigger pull is longer. You'll want to know that before you're in the field. And if I decline? Then you'll be carrying a weapon whose sound tells every enemy within 300 meters that something unusual is in this patrol, sir. The patrol commander will be informed. He may decline to take you. The silence that followed had a specific quality. The silence of a man with more experience in a specific domain, waiting for someone with more rank to stop talking and start learning. He took the L1A1. He spent the afternoon at the range. The trigger pull was longer. The balance was different. By 1700, he was comfortable with the mechanism. By 1900, he was stripping and reassembling it in failing light. By 2100, he was lying in his cot staring at the canvas overhead, wondering when he had last encountered a quartermaster sergeant who had made him feel like a recruit. The answer was 1950, his first week at Fort Benning. Collins had not finished with him that afternoon. After the boots and canteen and rifle, there had been the dog tags, metal on metal, into a padded pouch. Then the bootlaces. Collins taped over the metal eyelets individually with black electrical tape. The eyelets catch light, he said, and they click against each other if you move fast. Hargrove looked at his boots being systematically demetallized by a sergeant who was not asking for his opinion on any of it. What about my rank insignia? Collins looked up. Already gone, sir. I removed it when you weren't looking. Hargrove looked at his collar. The oak leaves were gone. The fabric showed 2 faint marks. If you're captured, rank makes you valuable, Collins said, returning to the bootlaces. If you're spotted, rank markings are visible at distance. In the field, you're just another man in the patrol. The patrol commander outranks everyone, including you. That's not personal, sir. That's the methodology. Hargrove said nothing. He stood in the quartermaster tent and understood that he was being stripped down to what the jungle required. Everything he had brought from America, boots, weapon, rank, radio, notebook, had been assessed and either replaced or removed. What remained was a man with an unfamiliar rifle and Australian boots, wearing no identification of any kind. He would write later that it was the most professionally disorienting 90 minutes of his career. The patrol briefing was at 0430. The patrol commander was Sergeant Russell Tan, 28 years old, with a face that gave nothing away and a voice with no wasted words. 5 other men on ammunition crates. None stood when Hargrove entered. None saluted. He had been told to expect this. He found a crate. Tan began without preamble. 5-day reconnaissance. The target grid square referred to by call sign only. Even inside the wire, coordinates were not spoken aloud. Hargrove had begun making notes when Tan's eyes moved to his hand. Sir, no notes in the field. I'm taking operational observations for my report. A notebook can be captured. It tells the enemy what we're looking for and what we've found. You'll commit it to memory or not at all." The words were even, not hostile, simply stated. Hargrove put the notebook away. Tan continued. Movement at approximately 1 kilometer per hour, not because the terrain required it, but because the methodology required it. Halts every 50 meters, minimum 2 minutes. No radio unless in contact. All communication by hand signal. Verbal communication prohibited unless Tan authorized it. What's our extraction plan if we make contact? We break contact and move to the secondary extraction point. We do not pursue. We do not exploit. What if we have the opportunity to significantly damage the enemy? Tan looked at him, not disrespectfully, the look of a man who has answered this question before. Sir, we are 6 men in the middle of an area controlled by 300 enemy soldiers. Our job is to find where they are and what they're doing and bring that information back. Once we make contact, they know we're there. Every second after that, we move toward extraction. A significant engagement means we stay in contact longer. Staying longer means casualties. Casualties are not acceptable. Every commander accepts some level of casualties. Not in a reconnaissance patrol, sir. Casualties mean the patrol has failed. The mission is intelligence, not combat. If we wanted to fight them, we'd send a company. Hargrove committed it to memory. The mission is intelligence, not combat. He had written papers at Georgetown on the relationship between intelligence collection and counterinsurgency effectiveness. He had never heard it stated that simply before. They moved out at 0500. The jungle received them without ceremony. One moment, the firebase. The next, tree line, morning light dropping by half, the sound of generators and voices and metal vanishing as completely as if it had never existed. Hargrove was third in the patrol order, behind Tan and a lance corporal named Mackenzie. Step where Mackenzie stepped. He stepped where Mackenzie stepped. The pace was unlike anything in his experience. Mackenzie moved with a deliberateness that Hargrove could only describe as intentional. Every footfall placed. Weight transferred from the outside edge of the boot to the ball and then the heel, testing the surface before committing. The knee absorbed rather than locked. The upper body still while the legs worked. The result was a silence Hargrove would not have believed possible from a man carrying 40 pounds. He tried to copy it. His pack shifted on the first slope. Tan was beside him in 4 seconds, tightening a strap without words. The patrol continued. At 0540, they had covered 200 meters. Hargrove's mind ran the arithmetic. American patrols covered 3 kilometers in 20 minutes. He thought about April's statistics. 9 enemy-initiated contacts, advance warning, an observation network that saw American patrols moving at American pace, making American noise, following American patterns. He thought about 6 men at 1 kilometer per hour, moving like they were trying not to wake anyone. At 0620, Tan raised his fist. The patrol stopped. Hargrove stopped mid-stride, right foot 6 inches off the ground. He held it. 30 seconds. A minute. 2 minutes. His thigh began to burn. He held it. 3 minutes. The burn became a localized pain he categorized and set aside. He had been in Korea. He could hold a stance. At 4 minutes and 20 seconds, Tan's hand dropped. The patrol moved. They made camp on the first night in a position Tan selected after 30 minutes of silent reconnaissance. Invisible from any direction. No ground cleared, no shelters built. They occupied space the jungle had already provided. Cold rations and silence. then defensive positions as darkness fell. Tan appeared beside Hargrove. "First nights are hardest," he said, barely a whisper. "You did well." Hargrove almost said, "We barely moved." He stopped himself. He understood by now that distance was not the metric. Detection was the metric. They had moved exactly as far as they needed to move without being detected. That was the job. "The American patrols," Hargrove said instead. "They move fast. They depend on firepower and air support. That works when you're trying to dominate terrain. It does not work when you're trying to understand the enemy. You cannot understand something you're frightening away." At 0840 on the first day, before camp, before any of this reflection was possible, Tan had led them into a depression behind a fallen teak tree and signaled them down. They dropped into cover. Hargrove lowered himself more slowly than the others. Tan appeared beside him, mouth to his ear, whisper almost subliminal. "Trail, 40 meters north. Used in the last 12 hours. Hargrove looked north. He saw jungle identical to the jungle in every other direction. For 2 hours they lay behind the fallen tree. Birds, insects, a lizard crossing 6 inches from Hargrove's face without noticing him. The sounds shifted in ways Hargrove could receive, but not interpret. He watched Tan reading them constantly, head moving in small increments, processing information that was reaching Hargrove, but meaning nothing to him. At 1037, voices. Vietnamese. Moving, not stationary. From the north. He felt his hand move toward the L1A1 without deciding to move it. He stopped the movement. Tan had not moved. Eyes north. Hands on his weapon, but not in a firing grip. The voices came closer. Easy footsteps. Men moving through territory they considered safe. 4 men in dark clothing. AK-47s slung, not in hand. One carrying a large pack. Walking on a trail that Hargrove could now retroactively see. A slight depression in the vegetation. Undergrowth pressed down by repeated passage. They passed 35 meters from the Australian position. One said something. Another laughed. They disappeared south. The patrol did not move for another 90 minutes. During those 90 minutes, Hargrove lay behind the fallen tree and thought about the word safe. Those 4 men had been moving through territory they considered safe. And they were right to consider it safe, because they understood who was in it and how those people operated. American patrols move at this pace, make this noise, operate these hours, can be monitored by observers who provide advance warning. That picture was accurate. Somewhere there was an equivalent intelligence picture for the Australian area of operations. Hargrove was beginning to understand that it said something very different. On the second day, Tan showed him the observation post. It was not a construction, a natural elevation and a screen of vegetation that, when occupied correctly, provided a line of sight along 300 meters of trail without offering any visible signature to anyone on that trail. Mackenzie had found it on a previous patrol. The patrol moved to it in darkness by compass bearing and pace count. From it, they watched the trail for 9 hours. Hargrove counted 53 separate individuals, groups of 2 to 7 moving at intervals in both directions, some clearly military, some appearing civilian, all unaware they were being observed. Tan photographed them with a 35mm camera and a 200mm lens. He noted times, directions, equipment, and estimated unit affiliations in a waterproof notebook using shorthand Hargrove could not read. Not a personal record, a formal intelligence document to be debriefed on return. At the end of 9 hours, Tan had mapped a supply route, identified 3 distinct unit affiliations from equipment and movement patterns, and established the timing cycle for resupply, peak movement in the 2 hours after dawn and the 90 minutes before dark. Without firing a shot, without making contact, without alerting 53 people that 6 men had been 20 meters from their trail for 9 hours. Hargrove thought about his S2. They appeared to have advanced warning of our patrol schedules. He thought about what that required. Observers, patterns predictable enough to monitor. He thought about what D445's intelligence picture of his battalion must look like. Patrols at American pace, noise audible at distance, equipment rattling, radio traffic, helicopters marking insertion points, a picture so complete and reliable that an enemy platoon could recon the trail at 1500 and find it clear, knowing Bravo Company would not move into position until well after dark. Then he thought about what the enemy's intelligence picture of this patrol must look like. Nothing. 6 men had been in the field 2 days and were invisible to an enemy using the trail multiple times daily. That was the asymmetry. Not firepower, not numbers. Information. On the 3rd day, Hargrove asked the question he had been composing since the morning of the 1st. They were in a rest position, eating cold rations. He moved close enough to Tan for a whisper. How long did it take to learn to move like this? About 18 months before a soldier is reliable in the field. Some longer. Some never get there. You have to want to disappear. Some men want to fight. Those men are useful, but not for this. Hargrove thought about his companies. Men from Fort Bragg, trained for fire and movement, for aggression, for the kinetic engagement American doctrine prized. Good men. Men who had no framework for wanting to disappear. You're building a different kind of soldier. We're building a soldier for this specific environment. In a conventional war, your doctrine is correct. Firepower, mobility, mass. Here, that doctrine tells the enemy where you are and gives him time to prepare. So we use a different doctrine. Is it replicable? Could an American unit learn this? The techniques can be taught. The philosophy is harder. American doctrine says that combat power is the answer. More firepower, more helicopters, more men. This says that less is sometimes more. Less noise, less movement, less contact means more intelligence and ultimately more kills. That's hard to accept when you've been trained the other way. But not impossible. I don't know, Tan said. I've never trained an American unit. Ask me again at the end of the week. The contact came on the 4th day. Mackenzie froze and raised a closed fist. The patrol stopped. Hargrove stopped. Movement in the vegetation to the left. 25 meters. Something large, not trying to be quiet. Tan signaled. 2 fingers pointing left. 2 enemy. The movement stopped. For 3 minutes, the patrol and whatever was in the vegetation existed in mutual unknowing. The enemy did not know the patrol was there. Then a single Viet Cong soldier stepped onto the game trail the patrol had been following. A K-47 in his right hand, a cooking pot in his left. Looking back over his shoulder at someone still in the vegetation, he saw Mackenzie from 12 meters. For 1 second, nobody moved. The soldier's face went through confusion, recognition, fear. Tan shot him. The L1A1 was less loud in the surrounding vegetation than Hargrove expected, but loud enough. The soldier went down. Tan was already signaling. Break contact, move east. A second soldier came out firing. His burst went into the ground in front of Mackenzie. 3 Australian rifles fired simultaneously. The second man went down. The patrol was moving before he hit the ground. Hargrove ran in the crouch Tan had described. Low, fast, feet placed with enough care not to fall. 2 meters behind Mackenzie. No one spoke. No radio calls. Just movement. 4 minutes of running, then a fast walk. 3 more minutes, then down into a dense patch of undergrowth. Defensive circle. Hargrove covered his arc. His hands were steady. He noted this. From the direction of contact, whistles, enemy signals, voices multiplying. Tan appeared at his shoulder, barely audible. They had a third man we didn't see. He'll have signaled. We're compromised. We extract tonight. The intelligence product is complete enough. We've been here 4 days. The mission is done. We were not detected until a chance encounter. The product we carry back will account for it. And the cache site we identified yesterday goes in the debrief. A rifle company acts on it in 3 weeks after the area has settled. That's how it works. They did not move for 2 hours. The sounds of pursuit moved through the jungle around them. Twice within 40 meters, once close enough that Hargrove could hear individual voices. The patrol lay in the undergrowth and made no sound. Hargrove's body understood what his mind was still processing. He lay completely still. Insects crossed his hands. Something moved along his neck and he categorized it, not a threat, and did not move. 10 meters away, Mackenzie was invisible. He knew Mackenzie was there because he had seen him go down. If he had not seen it, he would not have known. That was the point. The jungle did not hide you because you wore camouflage. It hid you because you stopped insisting on your own presence. American doctrine insisted on presence. Helicopters, artillery, aggressive patrolling, all of it a proclamation, we are here, we are powerful, we will find you. The enemy heard it. They planned around it. Australian doctrine was a question. "Where are you?" asked quietly, over days, without announcing that the question was being asked. At 19:30, Tan signaled movement. They extracted through the night. Compass and pace count, terrain Hargrove could not see but that Tan navigated with certainty. 3 times the patrol halted for 10 minutes for reasons Hargrove could not detect. 3 times they continued after the wait. He never knew what had been there. At 0340, they reached the extraction point. At first light, ARAAF Iroquois came in low and they loaded in 20 seconds. The debrief took 4 hours. Tan worked through his waterproof notebook with an intelligence officer who asked precise questions and received precise answers. 1 supply cache, 2 active trail systems, 1 rally point, movement patterns of elements from D445's 2nd and 3rd companies over a 4-day observation window. 2 items matched corroborating intelligence from a separate source and would be actioned within the week. Tan nodded. He asked for nothing further. Hargrove sat through the debrief and said nothing. When it ended, the intelligence officer turned to him. "Anything to add, Colonel?" "No," Hargrove said. "Sergeant Tan's report is complete." He said it in a way the intelligence officer noted and would mention later to the 1ATF intelligence officer. Hargrove met with Brigadier Graham the following afternoon. Graham's command post was a tent furnished with the minimum of what was required and nothing else. Graham was compact, with the kind of stillness in his face that Hargrove had come to associate with Australian officers generally. He offered tea. Hargrove accepted. "Well, Colonel, what did you think?" Hargrove had been composing his answers since the helicopter. He had rejected several versions. Graham was not a briefing room audience. I've been operating in Phuoc Tuy for 4 months under the assumption that my battalion's approach, aggressive patrolling, firepower, air support, artillery, was the appropriate methodology for this environment. I was wrong. Graham drank his tea. Not entirely wrong. Your methods are right for certain objectives: dominating terrain, protecting fixed positions, forcing engagements when you have superior firepower. But for understanding what D445 is doing and denying them freedom of movement, you need a different methodology. Your methodology. A methodology that works in this specific environment. It's not universally superior. It's contextually superior. Hargrove appreciated the precision. I denied your request for Bravo 7. Yes. That was an error. I made it based on an assessment of your capabilities that was incorrect. You didn't have the information to make a correct assessment, Graham said. Neither of us handled that well. We could have been clearer about what we were doing and why we wanted the expanded area. We chose not to be. A pause. Old habits. We're not accustomed to explaining ourselves to people who haven't been in the field with us. I've been in the field with you now. Graham looked at him steadily. Yes, you have. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. Two men recalibrating a professional relationship based on new information. I'll submit a formal request to 3rd Corps to restore your access to Bravo 7, Hargrove said. I'll also request a cross-training program, selected platoons spending time with your SAS, and I want a formal intelligence sharing arrangement. Your patrol product should be informing my operations. Graham nodded. The intelligence sharing, yes. Cross-training? Start small. 1 platoon. 90 days. 90 days. Long enough to change how they think. Short enough that if it doesn't work, you haven't invested too much. Hargrove thought about Tan. Some men want to fight. Those men are useful, but not for this. I understand. There's a 3rd ambush, Graham said. It was not a question. Hargrove stopped. Excuse me? June 9th, Charlie Company, your 3rd platoon. Bravo 7, Southern Grid. How do you know about that? We have sources in the area. Simply stated. The 3rd ambush had happened 2 days before Hargrove left for Nui Dat. Still under investigation. Charlie Company's 3rd platoon had taken a different route from their previous 3 patrols and still walked into a prepared position. 1 killed, 3 wounded. They know our route planning process, Hargrove said. It came out flat, without the defensiveness he might have expected from himself. They know your doctrine, Graham said. Doctrine is predictable. Even when you vary the specific route, you vary it in ways doctrine prescribes. The principle, avoid repetition, generates a pattern of variations that an intelligent enemy can model. And your patrols. We vary our methods in ways that are not doctrine-driven. Sometimes we move very slowly. Sometimes we don't move at all. Sometimes we sit in a position for 3 days. The enemy cannot model it because there is no pattern to model. Hargrove thought about 9 hours behind a fallen teak tree. 53 individuals documented on a trail they believed was safe. Not a shot fired. He thought about a platoon following doctrine correctly and walking into a position the enemy had prepared the night before. What would you have done in Bravo 7 if I had approved the request? Graham considered. 3 patrols in the first 6 weeks. No contact, pure observation. We would have mapped D445's resupply routes, identified their timing, located 2 or 3 cache sites, established which population centers were providing support, then passed that product to your battalion for targeted action. Specific locations, specific times, specific objectives. You would have done in 6 weeks what we've been unable to do in 4 months. In this sector, with our current methods, yes, probably. Graham was precise about the qualifier. Hargrove set down his tea. I owe you an apology, Brigadier. The request denial was incorrect. I made it without adequate information and with assumptions about your capabilities that were not justified. Graham accepted this with the same stillness he brought to everything. Appreciated. Not necessary, but appreciated. They shook hands. By the end of the meeting, access to Bravo 7 had been verbally agreed, the intelligence sharing arrangement sketched, and a cross-training proposal outlined that would take 60 days to get through 3rd Corps. It would take 43. The 3rd ambush appeared in the official record 3 days after Hargrove returned to his battalion. Charlie Company's platoon leader, Lieutenant Donahue, submitted an after-action report that concluded with an assessment Hargrove read twice. The enemy demonstrated foreknowledge of our route and had prepared the ambush position in the preceding 18 to 24 hours. Route selection followed battalion SOP for 3rd-time patrol variation. Enemy appears to have predicted the variation pattern. Recommend review of route selection doctrine. Hargrove called Donahue in. He did not tell Donahue what he had spent the previous 4 days doing. He asked questions. He listened. When Donahue left, Hargrove began writing. The report took 12 days. He called it Observations on Patrol Methodology and Intelligence Collection in Counterinsurgency Operations, a comparative assessment of U.S. and Australian doctrine in Phuoc Tuy Province, 1967. 38 pages. Classified, secret. Distributed to 3rd Corps, MACV, the Infantry School at Fort Benning, and the Special Warfare Center at Fort Bragg. The report did not frame the comparison as American failure. It framed it as a question of methodology applied to context. It described what Hargrove had observed with the precision he had practiced in the field. Specific dates, specific techniques, specific results. The stripping sequence at the quartermaster tent, the pace, the observation post on the 2nd day, 9 hours, 53 documented personnel, the contact on the 4th day, Tan's decision to extract rather than exploit. The last paragraph read, "The methodology I observed is not a special forces anomaly. It is a coherent doctrine for counterinsurgency intelligence collection that produces measurably superior results in the operational environment of Phuoc Tuy Province. The techniques can be taught. The philosophy requires deliberate reshaping of how soldiers understand the relationship between combat power and operational effectiveness. This reshaping is possible, but requires sustained institutional commitment. Units that undertake it will be more effective. Units that do not will continue to allow the enemy to determine the conditions of engagement. In the current operational environment, that is an unacceptable outcome." He signed it, Colonel David Hargrove, June 29, 1967. Access to Bravo 7 was restored on July 4, 1967. Australian patrols began on July 9th. By August 15th, they had located 4 supply caches, mapped D445's principal resupply routes, and documented enemy movement timing through 3 trail systems. 1 contact, 2 enemy killed, no Australian casualties. Hargrove's companies conducted 3 targeted operations in Bravo 7 based on that intelligence product. 31 confirmed enemy killed, 2 supply caches destroyed, an estimated 6 weeks of D445's resupply capability for the northern sector. The 2503's kill ratio for July and August combined, 19-1. In June, before the arrangement, 4-1. Ellis brought the figures to Hargrove without comment and left them on his desk. Hargrove looked at the numbers for a long time. Then he wrote in the margin, "Methodology, not firepower." He did not elaborate. The numbers elaborated for him. Sergeant Russell Tan rotated back to Australia in September 1967. He had served 2 tours and accumulated a patrol record his superiors described in recommendation letters with the word exceptional, and that Tan himself described, when pressed, as doing the job. He received a military medal. He attended the presentation, shook the appropriate hands, and returned to the barracks. He left the Army in 1971, moved to Queensland, and worked in agriculture for the rest of his working life. When researchers tracking Australian SAS Vietnam operations attempted to contact him in the 1980s, he replied with a brief note, "I prefer not to discuss it. There are men who didn't come home. That seems more important than what I did." That was the totality of the public record of Russell Tan's assessment of his own service. Hargrove's report traveled further than he had expected. The Special Warfare Center at Fort Bragg acted first. By October 1967, the Doctrine Division was reviewing the report's core arguments. By January 1968, elements of what it described, the pace, the observation priority, the intelligence over combat mission profile, were appearing in Special Forces patrol doctrine at unit level. Not attributed to Hargrove, not attributed to the Australians, attributed to operational experience in the current theater. Fort Benning took longer. There, the report encountered the specific institutional resistance Hargrove had predicted, the friction of a conventional infantry doctrine built, refined, and institutionalized over decades that did not easily absorb the suggestion that its core assumptions were contextually wrong. But it was absorbed through individual officers who had read the report and carried its arguments into their next assignment, through after-action reports referencing its conclusions without citing it, through the accumulated weight of operational evidence pointing consistently in the same direction. By 1970, the techniques Hargrove had described were recognizable in American long-range patrol doctrine. The specific attribution, a 38-page report, Phuoc Tuy Province, 1967, the Australian SAS, a sergeant named Tan, was not visible. The influence was present but untraceable to its source. Hargrove spent the next 8 years ensuring it was there. Staff assignments, teaching rotations, advisory roles. He retired in 1979 as a brigadier general. At his retirement ceremony, he was asked for the piece of wisdom he most wished he had understood earlier in his career. He said, "Silence is a weapon. Most armies never learn to use it." The room received this as a general observation about communication and leadership. He had intended it to appear that way. He kept the real meaning for himself. The 1st Australian Task Force left Vietnam in 1971. In 6 years, they suffered 521 killed in action against confirmed enemy kills, the post-war record put at over 2,500, a ratio of nearly 5-to-1 across all operations. The SAS component maintained a ratio the official history assessed at above 40-to-1. The D445 Provincial Mobile Battalion was assessed in 1968 as reduced to approximately 40% of its 1966 operational strength. The official assessment attributed this to Australian intelligence-driven operations. Enemy documents captured in 1969 and translated in 1971 described the Australian zone of operations as area of consistent intelligence failure. Australian forces cannot be reliably located or tracked by standard methods. Resupply operations through this zone require maximum security protocols and unpredictable timing. Losses among units attempting to use Phuoc Tuy resupply routes have been consistent and unexplained by standard assessment of Allied patrol patterns. Consistent and unexplained. The enemy had been watching the Australians for 2 years and reached the same conclusion Hargrove had reached in 4 days. The methods did not fit the model. The model existed to predict American behavior. The Australians had built a methodology no model, American or Vietnamese, could accurately predict. That was the achievement, not the kill ratio, though the kill ratio was the evidence. The achievement was operating outside the enemy's intelligence framework, moving through their territory in ways their observers could not see and their doctrine could not model. Tan had described it simply. You have to want to disappear. D445 had encountered a force that wanted to disappear. In 4 years, they never fully solved that problem. Corporal Mackenzie, the man in front of Hargrove in the patrol order, who had moved through the jungle with a precision Hargrove spent 4 days attempting to replicate, was killed in action on October 14, 1967, during an extraction under fire in the northern sector of Phuoc Tuy Province. He was 24 years old. He had conducted 31 patrol operations in Vietnam. His name is on the Australian War Memorial in Canberra, panel 22. The file lists his decorations, his unit, his date of death, and a brief operational summary. It does not specify which 31 patrols he conducted, what intelligence those patrols produced, or what operations were enabled by that intelligence. The file does not mention Colonel David Hargrove. Hargrove learned of Mackenzie's death through the 3rd Corps Channel in November 1967. He noted it in a personal diary. The entry is 5 words. Mackenzie, 24, did the job. He had met Mackenzie for 4 days. He did not pretend that 4 days constituted a basis for grief. But the 5 words were there, and they were not administrative. The report was declassified in 1993. By then, the techniques it described had been in American Special Operations doctrine for more than 20 years. Long-range reconnaissance patrolling, the pace, the observation priority, the intelligence over combat mission profile, the willingness to extract rather than engage, was standard. The doctrine had evolved and adapted, but the philosophical core was recognizable to anyone who had read the 1967 report or had, for 4 days in the summer of that year, tried to walk the way Mackenzie walked. The declassification generated modest academic interest. One military history journal published an article noting the report as an early example of Allied knowledge transfer in Vietnam. It cited Hargrove's name. It did not cite the Australian units. It described the methodology in general terms. That article was cited in a 2001 training manual for reconnaissance patrol leaders at the Special Warfare Center. The manual did not mention Australia. It did not mention Phuoc Tuy. It described the methodology as having evolved from operational experience in Southeast Asia. This was not incorrect. It was simply incomplete in the way institutional knowledge is usually incomplete. The lineage compressed, the specific origins absorbed into the general body of what is known and no longer questioned. In classrooms at Fort Bragg and Camp Lejeune, instructors taught the techniques. The pace, deliberate, placed, tested before committed. The halt, fist, freeze, hold the position. The mission profile, intelligence first, contact avoided unless unavoidable, extraction rather than exploitation. They taught it as doctrine. The students learned it as doctrine. Neither could tell you that the doctrine had been refined in Phuoc Tuy Province by men in slouch hats who moved at 1 kilometer per hour and were never heard coming. That information had not been lost. It had been made general, absorbed, translated from a specific experience. 6 men, 4 days, a fallen teak tree, 53 documented personnel on a trail they believed was safe, into principles that applied to any reconnaissance patrol in any complex terrain anywhere in the world. That translation was the achievement. The specific experience was the source. Ton did not know his methods were being taught at Fort Bragg. He would not have found it particularly interesting if he did. The job had been done. The techniques had worked. Whether they were being taught in an American classroom was not his concern. His concern was the men who had not come home. Mackenzie had not come home. Hargrove had gone home and spent 12 years using what 4 days had taught him to ensure that other soldiers understood what Mackenzie had understood so completely that it had ceased to be a technique and become a way of moving through the world. Silence. Patience. Disappearance. The jungle will kill you if you fight it. It will hide you if you work with it. That was the lesson. It was still being taught. The names behind it were mostly gone. Ton in Queensland, Mackenzie on a panel at the War Memorial, the others dispersed into civilian lives, leaving no public trace. Hargrove himself had been dead since 2001, a retirement in Virginia that ended with a heart attack on a Tuesday morning, with the newspaper still folded on the kitchen table. The lesson remained. That was enough. It had to be.